Okay. As Vian mentioned, I'm in charge of basically managing all of the pome rootstock trials that are funded through Hortgrow. So there's quite a number of trials. I'm just going to give you basically a general overview of what we do and what the outcomes or the goals which we try to achieve. So the way that I see the rootstock trials is that we have some general outcomes as well as some specific outcomes. So obviously in the industry there are rootstocks which are commonly used, and then we try and bring newer rootstocks in over the years, and then those new rootstocks need to be categorized basically in relationship to what we have. So generally we will look at vigor. How do these rootstocks compare to what's currently being used, as well as yield efficiency, fruit quality and storability, as well as differential nutrient uptake, and we do that by doing leaf analysis. So a general rootstock trial lasts 7 years. We have 1 or 2 years, depending on whether or not there's a tendency for alternate bearing, where we look at fruit quality and storability, and then we also look at the nutrient uptake in the beginning of the trial as well as at the end of the trial. So 2 snapshots basically just to see if there's any differences. Beyond general outcomes, we also use rootstock trials to answer more specific questions. Some of those would be the influence of the source material, the tolerance or the susceptibility to replant disease. We're also looking at synchronization in low-till areas. So how do rootstocks affect your phenology? And then we also have a rootstock trial where we are looking at if there's any effect of rootstock on the green color of Granny Smith. So just to give you an idea of how vast the portfolio is, this is where we have rootstock trials. So predominantly in Grabo, but we also have trials in Greyton, Wolseley, obviously Ceres, even Simondium, and there is a trial that we've just recently planted in the Langkloof, and it's not possible to show on this map, but even up in the Free State, in the Highveld, we have a trial going in this year. So we really are covering a large area of the Western Cape and in the Eastern Cape and even up into the Free State, so that we can basically get conclusive answers about these rootstocks. It was more common to basically look at a rootstock in one trial site and then get an answer, but we've realized over time that that isn't necessarily translatable into more than one site. And so now we try with newer rootstock trials. They are always planted in 3 sites, so that we can see if there's any interaction, which I spoke about earlier, but also to see if the performance of the rootstock is same over different environments. Just to give you an idea of the rootstocks which we evaluate, as Vian mentioned, we're getting quite comfortable with the Geneva series. So there's a list of the Genevas that we are evaluating, and those are at this stage being compared to what was the old industry standards, the Morling series, so your M9, M7, M793, and MM109. And then on the pear side, in terms of Pyrus rootstocks, we are evaluating BP1, BP3, OHF40, and OHF217. In terms of size reducing for pears, we're looking at quinces. So we now have 5 quinces, which is quite a number. That has increased from 3, so we've got 2 new quinces this season, which we will be planting in 2024. And then also very new in the country is Pyrus mollis interspecies. So this is the Bay series, and there it's actually possible to graft apples and pears onto those. We're not certain about the performance of that. The first rootstock, the OZCM1, will be evaluated with apples in the Free State. So that trial goes in the ground this year, and then the 4 other bays are for pears, and they will be evaluated in 2024 on a Pharrell trial. So I'm just going to go into a little bit of detail in terms of this one of the specific questions which we're asking. So this is a question which I think is quite relevant currently. There's new technology in terms of the propagation of rootstocks, which is tissue culture material, and there's a premium that you pay for that tissue culture rootstock. The premise is that the material is cleaner, and therefore I think there's the expectation that in the first 2 years or 3 years, your establishment is better in comparison to rootstocks which are derived from a layer bed. But we obviously need to test that. We need to confirm whether or not that's true using data. So those trials, very simple trials, we've basically just planted the same rootstock. 50% of the trees come from tissue culture and 50% come from layer bed. We've measured the scion diameter in the beginning at planting as well as the height. And then at the end of the season, we also measure that, see what the increase is, see if it's better, bigger in one of the treatments or the other. But on top of that, we've actually also measured each individual shoot at the end of the season. So those trees were planted as whips, which means that each shoot that developed in that season, and that gives us an idea of total growth. So I think with that, we should be able to get a good idea of, what is the potential that you get from getting a rootstock that comes from tissue culture or layer bed. The idea is that if you can get your yield in the third year higher, or if you can establish the trees quicker, so you can fill your space quicker, the cumulative yield over time will pay for that initial cost, which is extra on the tissue culture side. But like I said, we can't obviously trust just our emotions on that. We have to test that with data. So the first data was collected this year, which means we'll be able to have some conclusions relatively soon. I just want to give my acknowledgements. It's difficult to give it to specific parties because, like I said, I'm covering now at least 13 projects, which are over 20 locations. But Provar for managing all of the trials, Hortgrow, as well as the IP owners for funding the trials. Stellenbosch University is in part where we are answering more specific questions. As I mentioned, for instance, looking at the susceptibility or tolerance to ARD. So all of these parties, as well as the farms that allow us to plant the trials there, they are critical in being able to answer these questions. So thank you very much for everybody.